Hello, my little mathematicians. Today I'm going to help you get started on C-68, dealing on word problems with fractions. Remember, when there's not enough space, we always want to show our work on a separate sheet of paper. So when we do that, let's go ahead and label it C-68. And I'll go ahead and I'll just do a few with us, or at least get started on a few. So I'll do number 1 with you guys. Okay. It says, Miss Daza bought 3.5 yards of yellow fabric. She used 2/3 of the fabric to make a chicken costume. So how much fabric did she use? Remember, you can always pause the video, try it, and then unpause it and come back to see how you did. For number 1, what operation did you guys think to do? Add, subtract, multiply, or divide? Well, my hint to you is that whenever you have a fraction followed by the word of some other number, that means that you're going to multiply. So it's 2/3 times whatever this is. And you're like, but there's not another number there, Miss Love. However, 2/3 of the fabric. So like there actually is, because how much fabric do we have? We have 3.5 yards of fabric. So it's actually 2/3 of some other amount. So we're trying to figure out what is 2/3 of 3.5. And when I multiply fractions, what do I have to do again? Can I just jump in and multiply the whole numbers and then multiply the fractions? No. I got to first double check that they're each a singular fraction. So to change a mixed number to a singular fraction, that's making it improper. So I'm going to go 6 plus 1 is 7/2 times, that's already a singular fraction. Then you look to see if anything can cross cancel. And I see that these 2's can cross cancel to become 1, because 2 divided by 2 is 1, and that 2 divided by 2 is 1. These can't cross cancel with anything. So I'm going to go ahead and just multiply across. And you have 1 times 7 is 7, and on bottom 3 times 1 is 3. And then I don't want to leave it like that. I want to figure out like how much fabric is that she ended up using. So it's a fraction is literally the top divided by the bottom, right? So how many times does 3 go into 7? Well, 3 goes into 7 twice. And how much is left over? 1. So I'm going to put my remainder over what I divided by. So this one is 2.3 yards that she ended up using. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look at number 2. Number 2 says that Julia studied math for 3.3 hours during the 4 days before her last math test. What was the average amount of time she studied each day? Okay, there's several ways that you could do this. Okay, one thing is that let's make these easy numbers. Like, you know that you don't add or subtract, but I can't figure out if I multiply or if I divide. So let's say, okay, I have 3.5 hours during the 4 days before her last test. So what was the average amount of time she studied each day? So if you kind of just drew yourself a little picture right here, okay, for each day, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4 days, you want to know the total amount. So like, let's make these easier numbers. Let's say maybe like 4 and 2, right? So out of the 4 days, let's say she studied a total of 2 hours. If I put 2 in each box, is that a total of 2? No. So like, you have to figure out how much did she spend each day if I want that total amount. What do you think makes the most sense to figure that out? You would have to divide, right? So, and then you're like, okay, so wait, I do what divided by what? Is it always the bigger thing divided by the smaller thing? Not necessarily. Because, I mean, the biggest example I always come back to is, let's pretend that these pens are like candy bars. You only have 2 candy bars, but you need to split it up amongst 30 people on this island. How many pieces of candy bar does everyone get? Do they get 15 candy bars? No, you only had 2 to begin with, right? So you have to split these up and like cut them into little tiny pieces. So you end up getting a fractional amount of the candy bars because you're splitting it up. So when you divide, it's not necessarily always the bigger number divided by the smaller number. So now we have to think, okay, if you want the number of days to become 1, that's what I'm going to divide by, is the number of days. So out of the 4 days, how much was each day? So if I take the total amount and I divide by the number of days she actually studied, that's going to tell me then how much she studied each day. Okay, that one was pretty tricky. Now don't forget, when you divide, it's the same thing as multiplying. You need to first change these to single fraction divided by a single fraction. So to change this to an improper, you get 9 plus 1 is 10. Divided by this whole number to make it a fraction, you put 4 over 1. Now you can't just jump in when you're dividing. Remember, we can only multiply with fractions, so I'm going to do keep, change, and then flip. If you want, once you have a multiplication problem, then you can look to see if you can cross cancel or reduce anything. And I see that 2 can go into both of these. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. So now when you multiply across, on top you get 5, on the bottom you get 6. So you only studied like 5/6 of an hour each day, which makes sense because you only studied a total amount of 3 1/3, right? So it has to be like small amounts in order to get that total split up amongst 4 days. Okay, on my paper, I'm going to put 5/6. And then down below, I'm going to cross off the answers that I got. So the first one I got was 2 1/3. And the second one I got was 5/6. Now I'm not going to actually write anything down at the bottom just yet because I only write what's remaining at the end. So as of right now, I would do like WAFIVEDISHAN, then DSEAHIOUPS and IT because that's what's left. But notice there's not that many boxes because I haven't finished all the problems yet. So you cross off the 8 answers, and then whatever's left, that's what goes down here. So don't write anything until after you finish. There's one other one I want to get started on you guys with, and that would be number 5. Number 5 says a piece of plywood is 24 inches wide, is cut into strips 2.5 inches wide. So how many strips of this width can be cut? Do you guys think you would add, subtract, multiply, or divide? The trap is like, you're like, oh, I'm cutting it off, so I'm subtracting. That's not right. It's actually dividing, yes, because when you have a total amount of something and you're splitting it up equally, you take however much you have, which is the 24, and you divide it by how many people you're splitting it up amongst or how many equal sized pieces you're doing. So for number 5, I'm going to do 24 divided by 2.5 because that's how big I want each piece to be. And then you want to know, okay, so then how many pieces do I make? All right, so 24 over 1, there's that fraction. 4 plus 1 is 5 over 2. Remember, when you're dividing, you got to do keep, change, and flip. Okay, now unfortunately, I can't cross cancel anything. So when I multiply across, I get 48 over 5. And I want to figure out what that is. So 48 divided by 5. 5 goes into 48 9 times. And how much is left over? 3/5. So you want to know how many strips can be cut. Okay, when you're cutting the strips, you don't want fractional amounts. You want whole amount of strips, right? And for word problems, it's not just the rules of rounding. Whether this was 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, it's still going to be the same answer of how much do you actually have enough to cut of. Even though like the rules of 3/5, that's 0.6. So 9.6, you'd be like, oh, 0.6 tells you to round up to 10. Really? So you have enough fabric for 10 strips? No, you don't. You only have enough for 9 strips. Okay? So remember, the rules of rounding don't necessarily always apply when you're talking about word problems. And sometimes in word problems, yeah, you can have fractional amounts. That's okay. But sometimes you can't. Like, especially if you're ever talking about people, please make sure that you round it to whole numbers. We don't want to go chopping up people into pieces, right? Okay, and then the same thing for this. The strips, we want equal amounts. And so like, how many equal strips do we have? We have enough for 9 equal strips. So on number 5, I'm going to go ahead and put a 9 on my paper. And then down below, I'm going to find where 9 is and cross it off. And again, I'm not writing anything yet because I can't fill out the joke until after I'm done crossing off the 8 answers. All right, my little mathematicians, you got this. You're going to do great.